Good morning. Hello. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I know parking is a little bit of an issue, so we might have a few people straggling in, but I think we should get started. We have a lot to do this morning. I'm Karen Jacobs, and I'm the director of the OLLI program here at Sonoma State, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the fall course preview for OLLI. Can I ask how many of you here are here for the first time with us today? Wow. That's outstanding. That looked to be about 25 or 30 people at least. Thank you all for joining us. We are part of, as you probably know, a larger network of over 150,000 curious minds across the country who take OLLI classes on college campuses nationwide. So those of you who are new, you are part of a community here at Sonoma State that is over 1,500 people a year and over 150,000 nationally. So thank you for joining us. Our summer session was amazing. How many of you participated in the OLLI Summer Sampler? Excellent. Thank you all very much. It was the best summer on record for this program, and we tripled last year's numbers. We had over 450 people participating, many of whom were in this room, clearly, and over 800 enrollments. So thank you all for helping to make that a huge success. Thank you. We have a number of new instructors with us this fall, and today is a really good opportunity for you to get to know them and listen to their course content and their presentation, as well as seeing a number of veteran returning faces who probably will need very little introduction from me. Everyone will have 5 minutes to present their courses, and I've told them that you're a discerning crowd and to put their best foot forward. We have one instructor rushing here from Santa Rosa Junior College who will arrive right at 11:30. So I appreciate your patience as we run a few minutes over, but she's a new instructor, and I thought it really imperative that you get to see her in person. We also have had one substitution that I just want to bring to your attention. David Peretz will not be teaching the fall course, Diminished Democracy, but Mick Chantler has stepped in. Thank you, Mick, at the 11th hour, and will be teaching his course on Abraham Lincoln. That course is not listed in the catalog, but there are course descriptions on the table where the materials were when you walked in. You will hear Mick talk about it today. You can register for the course either online, where it has been added to the registration, or before you leave today. So please, how many of you know Mick and you've taken a class with, okay. So enough said. Those of you who haven't, just look at the hands around you. So those are the two sort of changes I wanted to mention. You may remember that last year was our 15th year, and we called it the year of fundraising. And you heard me over and over again mention that. It was indeed our focus for the year. Thanks to you, we raised over $45,000 for OLLI in that year, and I appreciate the support that came from many of you. This year, we're shifting our focus a little bit, and this year will be the year of marketing and wanting to get new bodies into the classroom and more bodies into the classroom. We currently serve over 1,500 students in this program, but as you probably know, there are tens of thousands of educated, curious adults over 50 in Sonoma County, and probably more moving here every day. Many of them have not yet discovered this wonderful program. So I would ask each of you to think of one person in your life who has not yet discovered OLLI, and share with them either a catalog, a new student discount coupon, a story of your favorite class or your favorite instructor, or better yet, just bring them along and bring them to the first week of classes and allow them to experience OLLI for themselves. Okay, so this fall, I want to talk about the benefits of membership, because you are now a member of the OLLI program. And what does that mean? This year, the benefits are greater than ever before, and you will see when you arrive for the first week of class, you will receive a snazzy new OLLI notebook with the indicia on the front. I could say it's real leather, but I'm not going to promise that. And you will be able to record all of your thoughts and all of your knowledge from OLLI classes and refer back to that knowledge throughout the year. You will also receive a Friends of OLLI at SSU button, which you may wear proudly to spark conversation at cocktail parties and other places. And people will ask, well, what is that OLLI you speak of? And you can tell them. But perhaps most importantly, you will receive free admission to the second annual Ed Stolman Memorial Lecture this fall. This year's lecture, featuring Dr. Margie Purser, who is the chair of anthropology here at Sonoma State, is called Whose Heritage Is This? And profiles her compelling work on cultural preservation and global heritage sites. The event represents a collaboration with our friends at the World Affairs Council of Sonoma County and will take place on the 17th of November. Last year, when we had the first annual Ed Stolman Memorial Lecture, you asked us to move the event to an afternoon slot instead of the evening. So, this year, it will take place at 1:30 in the afternoon. You also said, why can't we be at the Green Music Center? So this year, it will be at Schroeder Hall at the Green Music Center at 1:30 in the afternoon. I do listen to you. More reminders will come up about this event as we move forward throughout the fall, but please save the date for November 17th. And as a special treat, Dr. Judy Sakaki, the new president of Sonoma State, will be there to welcome all of you.
It's with great, great pleasure that I say, welcome back to OLLI, everybody. That's one of the perks of teaching in the fall, and I'm so glad to see you, and I'm so glad to be here. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun this semester, or this quarter, or whatever we call ourselves. Notorious women. I call it Notorious Women and Why We Love Them. But I understand in the catalog it's something about remarkable women. I changed the title a few times, but I really like the title, Why We Love Them, because we do have a fascination with notoriety. Look at our political landscape. Anyway, I've been teaching history classes that revolve around biographies of interesting women for the last number of years. And one of the things I discovered, in addition to learning their biographies, is really why these women, remarkable though they were, always ended up with a kind of negative reputation, which isn't surprising when one studies women's history. But I think this background of what happened as these women's lives were recorded is every bit as interesting as the women themselves. And this is what I'm going to be exploring in this class. I've shown you several of the most well-known of the notorious women. As we start in the upper left-hand corner, of course, is Marie Antoinette. I've added a really interesting, and I think there's a lot of application in the 20th and 21st centuries today. What do we expect of women who are our leaders? And I think it's particularly appropriate, of course, given the current election cycle. So, notorious women and why we love them on Monday mornings, when hopefully it won't be foggy. Thank you.
definitely a privilege to be here. My classes are very much a discussion format. I come with a lecture. And what I'm especially looking forward to is learning from each of you. So, my class, The Brain and Its Mind, we're looking at the relationship between the physical substrate of neural tissue between your ears and your experience of everyday life, and how those two things are related. We're going to cover all kinds of fascinating things, disorders of the brain and mind in particular. There are fascinating things called agnosias, in which people lose one part of their brain that is devoted to one particular task. There are people that are specifically blind to faces. It's called prosopagnosia. They can see everything else. Fascinating subject. Of course, I think it is. Today, I think, though, there's nothing more exemplary to studying the relationship between the brain and the mind than free will. Free will, in its formal, strong, scientific definition, is an uncaused event. It seems like we can control the laws of physics of our own volition. So it seems to be violating natural law. The science assumes causality. However, its seeming impossibility from a scientific perspective, it's equally undeniable that each of us feels as if we have free will. When our husband leaves dirty dishes in the sink, we ascribe that behavior to that individual, not the causal sequence of chain of events from the Big Bang until this moment. That individual, and so much of our everyday emotional life centers around this assumption. The emotions of guilt and shame and gratitude all assume we are in control. So, this is a bit of a paradox. The objective existence of free will isn't really a scientific question, although there has been some science showing that invoking a belief in free will has all kinds of positive effects on individual behavior. It even does things like increase scores on IQ tests, increase work efficiency, increasing self-esteem. But here, what I do in my lab, I still think we can study free will scientifically. And instead of asking, does free will exist, I ask, why does it seem like we have free will? From this perspective, asking if we have free will is like asking if we can taste the sip of Merlot. Of course we do. It's a sense, at least. And so the question is, why do we have free will? So how does this notion arise as a product of neural systems? And the idea is the brain is a complex system. It has a balance between structured order and random responses. It's very much organized in the way the weather is. There's some predictability and some unpredictability. There's a little bit of a dice roll that happens any moment your brain engages in some act of cognition or behavior. There's a little bit of stochastic variability that we refer to as neural noise. And neural noise, you can think of it just like radio static. It's ongoing variability in neural activity. And this ongoing neural variability, in my lab and in other recent work, seems to arbitrarily affect our behavior within a given moment. And in this class, we'll be talking about how this, among other topics, how this ongoing variability can affect behavior, how it changes as a function of circumstances, and actually how the distribution and the balance between neural noise and structured order changes with aging. There's a very specific pattern that manifests with aging that is directly related to behavior. We'll also be covering other topics like hemispheric specialization, split brain patients who seem to have two minds within one body. And they tell us a little something about us, that perhaps we may have multiple systems that are doing multiple things at a time that somehow all come together, that the ancient Cartesian phrase, "I think, therefore I am," might better be characterized as "we think, and therefore we are." These are the fundamental issues of this class, and I really look forward to meeting all of you. Thank you.
Hello, Sonoma State OLLI. I'm Eric Sinrod, and I'm back. I really enjoyed being with you last term when I taught international law and politics. We had a pretty good turnout, and I'm hoping for even more with respect to my upcoming course. My upcoming course is in my ultimate sweet spot. It has to do with internet. The internet, we're all living online. We're going to talk about risks, liabilities, and potential solutions. So those of you who joined me before, please come back. Please bring your friends, and I hope you're motivated by watching this video. My class will be taught on Tuesday mornings. So what's the course about? Well, whether we like it or not, we can't bury our heads in the sand any longer. We're all living our lives out loud, online, on the internet. And of course, there are many benefits. That's why we're doing it. We can communicate with our friends and our families in so many new and different ways instantaneously, whether by video, say FaceTime for example, or Skype, whether you're emailing, whether you're texting, Snapchatting, Instagramming, the list goes on and on. I like the fact also that we can make purchases online. You don't even need to leave your house or your apartment or your facility. You can just get on your computer, you can get on your laptop, you can touch your phone, and within a day or two, a product that you order will show up at your doorstep. How cool is that? But, and there's always a but, there are risks, there are perils out there. And we're going to talk about certain case examples. Some of them went to court. I'll present them. I'm going to ask you your opinions as to which way the result should have gone, and then we're going to find out. But here are some of the things we're going to think about too, sort of as part of this whole framework. All right, did you know that Facebook, by head count, is the world's largest nation? 1.5 billion users. That far exceeds the population of China, the world's most populous country. Are you on Facebook? I am. Okay, that's well and good. Where's the problem? Well, you might not know, but over 600,000 Facebook accounts a day are compromised and hacked. That's a problem. We're going to talk about it. We'll talk about the Ashley Madison case. Are you familiar with that? Well, if not, let me enlighten you just a little bit right now. Ashley Madison is the world's largest, hold on, adultery site. That's right. On the site, it proclaimed, life is short, have an affair. And guess what? There were 38 million anonymous users, supposedly anonymous, until the hack happened and identities were revealed. And what were the consequences? There were divorces, there were job terminations, there was extortion by foreign governments, that's right. And there were even, unfortunately, suicides. That's a problem. We're going to be current. We have a presidential campaign going on, an election coming up. What about the private email server controversy surrounding Hillary Clinton? Is it a scandal? Is important information being withheld? Or is it just a minor incident that should be ignored and really it's just a matter of politics and it'll go away? What about recent revelations that the Russians hacked the Democratic National Committee emails? If that's the case, now we have a foreign state intervening through the internet into our political system. That's a problem. So what are some of the topics we're going to consider? Well, we're also going to consider more statistics too. Like, for example, did you know that only 1 in 5 emails is legitimate? That's a problem. 2 out of 3 people on the internet will be a victim of cybercrime eventually. That could be you or me. Most companies suffer a cyber attack within a given year. The cost of remediating a cyber attack, just one, is over $3.5 million. It takes over 156 days to even detect most hacks. But I digress. What are some of the topics? We're of course going to talk about privacy and security because I've been alluding to that. We'll talk about freedom of internet speech and potential censorship. Very important. We'll also address cyberbullying and harassment, which is very relevant to our nation's youth and frankly also to women. We'll cover intellectual property issues in cyberspace. We're talking about trademarks, trade secrets, copyrights, patents, and then cybercrime and cyber warfare. 92% of cybersecurity experts say that cyber hacks and cyber warfare constitute a threat to our national security and to our economy. So these are some of the topics we're going to cover. I have to be brief right now. I'm sorry I could not be with you right at this moment, but as you're watching this video, I'm teaching undergrads right now, which is important. But I hope to see you live, not in video, very soon. So run, don't walk. Sign up for this course as soon as possible. Anyway, I do hope to see you soon. I think we're going to cover some very important territory. Take care.
Thanks very much. Nice to see you all again. I'm so impressed by the visuals that were up here. They said, why don't you go ahead and put together some visuals? And I looked for some good images from ISIS, and I found them, but I thought, nah, this is no way to do it. It doesn't really lend itself to visuals. The class will be ISIS, its historical and religious foundations. If we are going to understand this, we have to understand it in human terms. These are not monsters from outer space, although it's easy to script them as something like that. Today, when people hear of the Battle of Karbala, you've probably heard of that, right? It's of recent history. What comes to mind is the fierce battle fought between coalition forces and Iraqi insurgents twice, in the year 2003 and the year 2007. But Karbala is rich in battle history, and the story on which this course is based, the rise of ISIS, has its start at Karbala over 13 centuries ago. What happened at Karbala on October 10th of 680 CE, that's 680 CE, was a prelude of what was to come, because Muhammad had not been dead for 50 years when fights broke out over who was to be the leader of the Muslim community. And the word is successor. You're familiar with the word in Arabic, caliph. Who is to be the caliph? And the fourth caliph was none other than Muhammad's grandson, Hussein. And the fights and dissensions within the community resulted in the murder, literally the massacre, of Hussein and his family. The women in his family were taken into slavery. And what happened that dreadful day at Karbala in the 7th century is really the inauguration of the Sunni-Shia split and of the intense and bloody rivalry that has characterized their subsequent histories. Very briefly, in this very short presentation, Islam is divided into two major groups. Majority Sunni, those are 85% or so. Minority, about 14% Shiite. It's a well-known fact, and one of the contributing factors of the rise of ISIS, and here I'm not blaming America first or anything like that, but when coalition forces went into Iraq in 2003, certainly intelligence was done, but it wasn't delivered to the troops. And when the so-called liberation took place, the Iraqi people tore into them, and there were astonished American observers saying, geez, these guys don't seem to like each other. You think? Yes, there's incredible hostility between Sunni and Shiite. ISIS is the product of that centuries-long hostility. And what people need to understand is that the primary target, the top of the kill list, if you want, For ISIS is not Jews or Christians or Americans or Europeans. It's Shiite Muslims, right? Other Muslims are what they take to be heretics. Very similar to what happened in Christianity at the Reformation. And there were dreadful, like the 30 Years' War and dreadful massacres. And somehow we found our way to Westphalia. Westphalia, 1648 was the so-called Peace of Westphalia, where it was decided that Protestants and Catholics simply had to stop fighting and develop a peace. The Muslim communities in the Middle East have not found their way to Westphalia yet. And what we're facing with the rise of ISIS is just that. The differences in the Shia and Sunni beliefs and traditions will be spelled out during the course. For now, the point is that ISIS is not the only bloody extremist eruption in this sectarian rivalry. It is the most recent, and it is a moment in Islamic history that lionizes our media and the world's attention and fear, and there are good reasons for that. They are notorious for spectacular, grotesque, and savage acts. That is very important, and what we'll be looking at in the course is how did it come to this? These are not people from Mars or anything like that. How did this come about? What the course will not be, by the way, is an enthusiasm, an anti-Muslim enthusiasm. That's not the point. The point is to understand what's going on so that we're going to be able to stop what's happening. Actually, we're not going to stop what's happening. The people who are involved in it are going to have to be the ones that stop what happens. Special attention will be brought to a charismatic desert preacher of the 18th century in Arabia. You may not have heard of his name, but you've heard of the movement that's taken his name. His name was Ibrahim ibn al-Wahhab, and his followers took his name Wahhabi. He was an extremist, and he made a fateful alliance with a local Arab chieftain in 1747 named Muhammad ibn Saud. Saud and the family of Saud and the family of Wahhab developed an alliance, and together they made extensive conquests, with Wahhab being the religious authority and Saud being the political authority. The place came to be called, the Arabian Peninsula came to be called Saudi Arabia as a result. So the family of Saud is the ruler, and Wahhabism is the official national religion. It took a long time for Western press, Western media, because we don't want to be a bunch of bigots, right? But there is a real problem with the Wahhabi religion. Gradually, piecemeal, people are beginning to talk about it. Actually, one of the journalists that was having fits about it for the last 5 years was Thomas Friedman. He was pointing out that so long as the national religion of Saudi Arabia is Wahhabism, they are our allies in name only. So what we'll be doing in the course is looking at the history, the structure, and especially the ideology of Wahhabism, because in a very real sense, ISIS is applied Wahhabism. Is this making sense? How many of you have heard of Wahhabism? Okay, good. We're on the same page. Wahhabism, as I say, remains the national religion of Saudi Arabia. That of itself isn't a problem, but Wahhabism has not undergone what in the West is called a reformation, and that is a problem. ISIS is indisputably terrorism. It is methodological savagery. Very few people will disagree with that. But is ISIS Islamic? Do its practices constitute Islamic terrorism or just plain terrorism? This is a question that has vexed many good, thoughtful, well-informed people, and rather than begin with an answer to that question, it'll be something that we'll discuss throughout the course. I hope to see you there. There's going to be a grim aspect of it all, of course, but in general, the overall approach of the course will be positive and, insofar as possible, optimistic. I think we can do this, we being the human species. Hope to see you there.
Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone. This fall, I will be teaching my course on Abraham Lincoln for the second time here at Sonoma State. The first time was in the fall of 2011. In fact, it was the first course I ever taught at Sonoma State OLLI, so this is a bit of a homecoming for me. I'm curious, how many of you took that class in 2011? I hope to give you enough reason to sign up again, because I've altered my material. I've taught this course many times over the last 5 years in different venues, and altered the material, and I feel my knowledge in Lincoln has grown over the period of time because I've had an opportunity to attend the Lincoln Forum back in Gettysburg a few times and sat at the feet of the masters in Lincoln studies, men like Eric Foner and Alan Guelzo and so forth, and had a chance to pick their brains. So I think this will be an original course, even though I did teach it once before. It's entitled The Many Faces of Abraham Lincoln, and the reference from buffoon to philosopher king refers to the fact that our most beloved president, according to all polls that Americans have responded to over the last 50 years, Lincoln always comes out number one in our preferences, both by lay people and professional historians alike. But he was also regarded as our most detested president. We must remember that Lincoln was elected in 1860 with somewhat less than 40% of the popular vote. He was arguably a fluke president, in a manner of speaking, in that he was elected with this small vote total because there were 4 candidates in the race that year, which enabled him to get in with such a small popular vote total. And yet he goes on in history to become our most beloved president, largely, and I'm not trying to draw a laugh here when I say this, largely due to the fact that he was assassinated. When a president is murdered in office, it does wonders for their historical reputation, and it enhances their resume, curiously. I think we could say the same thing happened with John F. Kennedy. So what we're going to be looking at is how, in our popular imagination, Lincoln morphed from being a buffoon, a country bumpkin, which was what his critics in 1860 and throughout the Civil War accused him of being, someone who was in far over his head during this period of national crisis, someone who did not have the intellectual background and training to take on a disaster of the magnitude of the Civil War. And despite all this, he goes on to become a masterful statesman, steers the country through its gravest crisis, and brings the ship of state home safely at the end of 4 years, and then goes down in history as our greatest leader. It's a great journey, and it's one that I think you'll find to be fascinating. Most Americans are fascinated with the Civil War. We've spent 150 years reflecting on the meaning of the war, and we still haven't really arrived at final conclusions. I think it would be safe to say that the 2 greatest issues raised by the Civil War era are ones that we're still struggling with, and that's the role of African Americans in American society and the relationship between the power of the states and the power of the federal government. We're still working out those details, aren't we? So in week 1 of our course, we'll be giving an overview of the life of Abraham Lincoln so that everybody has the proper sequence of events in his career and can put the events of the Civil War into context. We'll also talk about the crisis of the 1850s, which permitted this country bumpkin, this practically unknown lawyer from the western plains of Illinois, to rise meteorically to the White House by 1860. And then we'll examine how he handled the opening crisis days of the Civil War. So that will take us through week 1. Week 2, we're going to be looking at the strange paradox that the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln, as Republicans repeatedly refer to their party, was founded by a liberal, which will be an argument that I'll try to justify in week 2. I think it would be safe to say that Lincoln's fundamental political instincts are what we would call liberal today, although the term liberal in his day meant something quite different than what the term refers to today. But Lincoln was a prime proponent of free higher public education for American youth. He was the instigator of the Homestead Act to give farmers an opportunity to get a new start in life out on the Western Plains at a minimum cost. He is the designer of the nation's communications and transportation system. All this happening during the Civil War, when he is fighting literally for his physical as well as the national political existence. Of course, his most important, if you want to call it, liberal contribution to American public thinking was in ending slavery, or working very hard to end slavery, and to even move haltingly toward giving the freedmen some basic civil rights, including a handful of them at least the right to vote. So we'll look at the argument that the party of Lincoln really, it's strange to think that its original, its member would probably not be in agreement with very many current Republicans. It seems highly unlikely that Lincoln could ever be nominated to the Republican Party presidency today. Lincoln's critics, and they are legion, level the charge against him that Lincoln was a racist, and we're going to spend an entire lecture analyzing this argument. I'm going to argue that the charge is true on one level, but relatively meaningless on another level, because in mid-19th century America, everyone was a racist. So to condemn Lincoln for his racial thinking is perhaps valid on one level, but does not begin to tell the story of this complex man's thinking. I believe it's to his great credit that toward the end of his life he was re-evaluating seriously all of his basic assumptions about race and the role that blacks could play in a free American society. So that will take us through week 3. Lincoln was a forceful, aggressive president. Probably only Franklin D. Roosevelt took more shortcuts with the Constitution than Abraham Lincoln took. I think he had to, given the gravity of the crisis he was facing, but it certainly ruffled a lot of feathers, to say the least. He was known by his Democratic opponents during the war as King Abraham Africanus I, and truly was despised as a dictator, not only in the Confederacy, obviously, but throughout much of the North. Even in 1864, when he ran for re-election, he won by only about 55% to 45% margin, which, considering that no Southerners were allowed to vote in the election, is a fairly close margin. So I don't think it would be accurate to think that at any time during his career, a majority of Americans were big Lincoln fans. That's really not the case. That's going to happen later, after his death. But we'll look at the charge that Lincoln was a dictator in week 4 and try to sift and sort out the arguments that would tend to support that position and those that would tend to ameliorate that charge and make it clear, as I believe, that Lincoln ultimately did what he had to do in order to save the Republic in this hour of grave crisis. Week 5, we'll shift gears and talk about Lincoln's interior personality, the nature of his thinking on the world. Lincoln was described by his friend and law partner, William Herndon, as having the saddest face I ever attempted to paint. That was by the official, that quote comes from the official White House portraitist, a man named Carpenter. Lincoln wrestled with what we would call clinical depression. In those days, it was called melancholy. Throughout his life, during his youth, he had 2 very serious nervous breakdowns. He constantly wrestled with the possibility of suicide until his marriage to Mary in his 30s. And then he spent the rest of his life dealing with that problem. So he had plenty to be depressed about. And indeed, we'll see that Mary herself was someone that wrestled with bipolar depression throughout her life, and we'll spend quite a bit of time looking at the tumultuous Lincoln marriage in week 5 as well, and try to relate that to bigger national and political issues, because I think there was a connection between the 2 events. And then in week 6, we're going to look at Lincoln's religious beliefs as they evolved over the years from the time he was a young atheist out in New Salem, Illinois, and delighted in shocking people with his heretical beliefs on the Bible and on God and on Jesus. And then, at the end of his life, seems to have become a profoundly deep theological thinker. It's often been said that Lincoln's second inaugural address is probably the most stirring piece of national theology ever uttered by an American. And here's someone who had no formal training in philosophy or in religious studies, and yet he's able to compose something as stirring as his second inaugural address, which we'll look at in some detail in week 6. So that's the general framework of the course. I hope that you'll see fit, some of you will see fit to take the course. It's a topic that I think never grows stale. I think we find in Lincoln, if there is any hope that we're going to extricate ourselves from the mire of civil discord, I think we can look to the soul of Abraham Lincoln for some inspiration on that. So hope to see you on Wednesday morning, beginning September 21st. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thanks for the chance to be here. Yes, this is my second chance to teach here in OLLI. I'm really looking forward to it. The class that I'm offering this time is actually one that I've taught before at the OLLI program at UC Berkeley. But I want to do a few different things this time, and this is not like Lincoln Scholarship where there's a large literature that we can draw on. I think this is a field of research that I'm interested in that's rather more unfinished, and that's the nature of political journalism, especially in the Bay Area, and especially after the Second World War. I think there's a kind of genealogy that we can tease out here. There's a kind of, niche that that Bay Area journalists occupy in the national media ecology, and I want to try to get at the nature of that. This was my preoccupation before I turned my gaze to the Grateful Dead. So this is something of a return to a book project that I was working on before that and issued in a book called A Bomb in Every Issue, which is a book about Ramparts Magazine. I had never heard of Ramparts Magazine until I was in my 40s. I was born in 1959, but I'm going to guess that many of you have. Just, would you give me a show of hands quickly? Yeah. Okay, so this was a big surprise to me that there was this important magazine that had been largely forgotten after its final demise in 1975. And so it was digging into Ramparts and its history that led me to this topic and to this book project. And in fact, is back in the news again with the death this week of Warren Hinkle, who was the editor and publisher of Ramparts Magazine. And the reason I was late today is because I got a call from the Washington Post. They're working on his obituary, And so I want to use that occasion, that sad occasion actually, to reconsider the role not only of Ramparts Magazine but of Bay Area journalists taken together. So these are my obsessions. You can see it's Ramparts Magazine. Before that, I wrote a book on Carrie Williams, who's also a California political journalist, later went on to edit The Nation magazine through the McCarthy era. Very tough period. I think he was the editor of The Nation from 1955 to 1975, originally from Los Angeles, though. So I want to think about him as well in this course. I think I'll just move on. I want to start with a quick historical sketch so we understand where we are in the history of American journalism, not today, but in the course. And so we'll probably start after the gold rush and talk a little bit about the literary activity in journalism. When we think of that, of course, we think of Mark Twain. There were others. And the way that those bohemians, as they described themselves, bohemianism was a kind of very, very trendy issue that was kind of radiating out from Paris in the mid-19th century. The San Francisco people caught on with it and reinvented themselves, not as, people out somewhere out there, but as people who are in touch with very cosmopolitan literary trends. And so I want to talk a little bit about that and then move to the muckrakers, especially the California muckrakers. Just a quick little taste of Lincoln Steffens, Upton Sinclair, who of course ran for California governor twice. The second one was a really kind of crazy story when he ran in 1934, and also Carrie Williams. The next move I want to make is actually kind of an unusual one, maybe journalistically, but I want to look at KPFA, the first listener-sponsored radio station. Started in Berkeley in 1949, has since become a kind of network, Pacifica Network. But there was a kind of culture there that led to a certain kind of journalism that became very politically unpopular nationally during the 1950s and the early 60s. And also I want to look at the connection between KPFA and what people call the San Francisco Renaissance and the Beats, and then later anti-war and civil rights and free speech activism in Berkeley. I don't want to go through all these bullet points, but KPFA actually then played a very critical role in the Patty Hearst affair and her kidnapping. You may recall that she released her communiques to KPFA. Of course, I want to spend some time on Ramparts Magazine. This is, again, has been in the news. I also want to point out that two of the other outlets that we're going to look at were founded by Ramparts veterans. So there's a way that Ramparts Magazine becomes a kind of point of origin for a lot of Bay Area alternative and radical journalism that actually had national and even international significance. So some of the notable people that came out of Ramparts Magazine, of course, Warren Hinkle, Bob Scheer, Eldridge Cleaver was serving time in state prison. Ramparts Magazine helped get him out of prison and gave him a job. That was a precondition for his release from prison. Ramparts hired him. David Horowitz actually was a writer and editor at Ramparts Magazine. He and some other Ramparts alumni, of course, made the long march to the right after that. So I want to talk and think a little bit more about how that happened as well. Rolling Stone magazine, one of the magazines that came out of Ramparts. It actually started when San Francisco Chronicle music critic Ralph J. Gleason became so furious with Ramparts magazine because of a story that Warren Hinkle wrote about the San Francisco hippies right on the cusp of the Summer of Love, that Ralph resigned in a towering rage. And later that year, he and one of his proteges, also a Ramparts person, Jan Wenner, founded their own magazine called Rolling Stone, which of course is still around today. Of course, it's a music magazine primarily, but they've always been more than that, and I want to take a close look at the kind of political journalism that they've done over the years, starting with, but by no means ending with, the work of Hunter Thompson. Mother Jones was also started by Ramparts veterans. That started in 1977, I think it was, by Adam Hochschild, Richard Parker, and Paul Jacobs. Still around, still winning awards. also a very rich history, but quite different one from either Rolling Stone or Ramparts, and I want to look at the relationships between those three rather. The Center for Investigative Reporting, I didn't really have a very good picture for them, but you may recall that there was a movie called The Insider that came out recently, where Al Pacino played Lowell Bergman. Lowell Bergman was one of the former Ramparts reader, Rolling Stone contributor, who decided to stay in San Francisco when Rolling Stone moved back to New York City in 1977. And he and two other fellows, David Weir and Dan Noyes, started the Center for Investigative Reporting. And Lowell he was now at the journalism school at UC Berkeley and does all the front lines that you may have seen, or some of the front lines that you may have seen on television. He was played by Al Pacino in The Insider, and there's a speech in there. We got to watch it. It only takes about 5 minutes, but it's extraordinary. Has anybody seen that movie? Okay, so this course has movie stars and everything, is what I'm trying to say. One of the other outlets I want to look at is Salon.com, one of the first online political magazines. David Talbot, who's pictured here, was the first editor, and he presented it as a smart tabloid. And very kind of different history for various reasons than the other outlets that I've mentioned. But with Warren Hinkle's death this week, David Talbot got out in front and wrote some long pieces about Warren and Ramparts and how inspired he was by Ramparts. He also wrote for Mother Jones. And so I think Salon very much belongs in this kind of genealogy that we're tracing out. Finally, I want to look at Daily Kos and some of the other Bay Area blogs and online sites that came out. This one came out actually in the run-up to the invasion of Iraq. I think a lot of people felt, both here and elsewhere, that the mainstream media outlets were not doing a great job on reporting on that and some other important issues. And that created, and with the new technology, created a kind of opening for a different kind of journalism. And this one was founded in Berkeley by Marcos Militzis, and I want to talk about their journey. Some big themes that I want to, these aren't the point of the course, but I have the feeling they're going to be coming up over and over again. One is, do these organizations constitute any kind of whole that we can make any kind of generalizations about? Certainly there's a lot of, there's a kind of, family resemblance, but certainly I don't want to overlook the differences either. The other thing is, what's going on in political journalism and the national media ecology in general, and how are some of these outlets responding to that, and the challenges that that news organizations face today. And I'm particularly interested in the notion of these business models that we seem to be in pursuit of, have been in pursuit of for over 2 decades now. It's coming. It's not coming. And I think it would have come by now, but we have such great faith in the technology that crumbled the old business model for political journalism that we think there's going to be a technological solution to the current crisis in political journalism. So I want to, we'll be checking in on that topic from time to time along the way. So that's what I have in mind. I hope, as I say, this is unfinished work. I really welcome everybody's input and experiences, questions and curiosities, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.
There you go. The course is Understanding U.S. Macroeconomic Events. This was at Dominican, this was a 8-lecture course. So I've decided to make it a 6-lecture course, and the way you do that as an economist is you speak faster. And the key thing is, as you look at the course structure, the first lecture is going to be on GDP and economic growth, looking at economic growth in both the short term and the long term. Then we take a look at the labor market and unemployment. In the third lecture, we cover inflation. Finally, we jump into the policy issues, fiscal policy and federal debt, which continue to be very controversial and misrepresented by almost everyone. Then monetary policy, we'll get into quantitative easing, and we're going to end the course on a discussion of the financial collapse And by the end of that course, hopefully you'll walk away understanding what I've understood as a consultant working in the banking sector. No, it didn't have to happen. We did have a choice. They didn't have to let Lehman Brothers go bankrupt. And eventually this will all become apparent as all the emails of Ben Bernanke become public. So just one of the things to show you since I'm new to the program is what I like to do in the lectures is I use a lot of data slides. And the reason I use a lot of data slides is because words in economics tend to be confusing. And one of the things to talk about is this recession that we've had, how bad it is, and how weak the recovery has been. It has been incredibly weak. And the question is, why has it been so weak? And the answer, as usual, is about politics. It's not about economics. We understand how macroeconomies work, and right now I would say the economic growth rates of all the advanced economies on the planet is far too low, and it is all because of mismanagement at the macroeconomic policy level. If you look at this recession compared to others, there's no question that, and this recovery, there is no question about it in terms of looking. We've had 11 recessions and recoveries since World War II. If you look at how the performance of this economy, how it's been, it has been much weaker, and there is a reason and there is an explanation for why it's much weaker. And let's just say the media is largely untrained. Even some of the smartest media commentators and pundits they really don't understand, and they're not schooled in macroeconomics, and that really is what this course is about. It is about telling you and explaining to you and teaching you what every undergraduate in the United States is currently being taught in their intermediate macroeconomics course. And one of the reasons I know that was I was teaching that course at UC Berkeley. And if you look at unemployment and unemployment rates in context, boy, there's a lot of political misinformation out there. They think, oh, unemployment's much worse than measured. But in fact, we have multiple unemployment measures in the economy, and if you look at these multiple unemployment measures, there's this whole world of workers out there. They're called discouraged workers. And when they're surveyed by the Department of Labor and asked the question, are you currently employed? And they say no, and they say, well, are you interested in working? They go, well, yeah, well, I'm discouraged. And so what you find out is there's a great deal of correlation between the experience of the marginal worker and what's happening at the macroeconomic level. So, for example, right now, the unemployment rate looks to be near full employment, but there's a large body of workers now coming back into the labor force. And if you have any doubts, I suggest you just get on Highway 101 in the morning. And finally, one of the core constructs in economics and why macroeconomics was invented really in the 1930s is all about this relationship between how we measure our economic output and employment. You are looking at dots on a graph that relate the change in output to the change in employment. There are very few things in economics that are this consistent over a 70-year period, and there is a reason for this. And the reason is this guy, John Maynard Keynes, figured all this stuff out in the 1930s, and those first principles in terms of how macroeconomies work are still applicable today, despite what you hear on Fox News. And all you have to do is look at the history. If you look at the performance of the US economy before Keynes and after Keynes, you would say there's a lot of volatility in the economy, but boy, there is a lot less volatility since John Maynard Keynes and Keynesian principles were started to be employed. And if you look at the right-hand graph and look at the inflation rates, it is not a coincidence that the average inflation rate since 1990 has been 2%. That is a direct function of monetary policy targeting the inflation rate and adjusting macroeconomic policy when it deviates from that. And as a result of that, we'll be discussing Janet Yellen, who used to teach at UC Berkeley. We're going to be discussing her utterances at the Jackson Hole Lodge last week, where my wife and I were 2 weeks before that. And she's learning by doing, and one of the things you learn by doing, you really can't say anything offhand as a Fed governor and not expect the markets to react. And so, the story of macroeconomics is we are all better off because of the application of Keynesian macroeconomic policies across the planet. And one only has to look at the macroeconomic performances before. We have grown more consistently. In general, our recessions have been less deep. Unemployment has not risen as far as it has prior to Keynes, and yet the politics intervenes, and it keeps the governments from employing policies that they know will work. And so you look at the two greatest policies occurring in the US economy right now. They're called fiscal policy and monetary policy. Both of them can work together to stimulate aggregate demand. You look at the recent forecasts of economic growth, they're well under the productive capacity for growth in the United States, and you say why, and the answer is very clear. Our interest rates are bounded at zero, and we do not have enough fiscal stimulus, and we know how to generate fiscal stimulus, and if we did generate that fiscal stimulus, we'd generate more employment, but alas, politics intervene. So if you look at what you'll learn in this course, you're going to learn about the lack of additional stimulus in the period from 2011 to 2014 is the primary explanation for why the economy has been growing so slowly. And what the Fed has been doing, because the Fed believes in Keynesian economic policies, and if you just read what they say to the public, they will tell you that there has been too little fiscal stimulus, and as a consequence, they have put $4 trillion of reserves into the monetary system. And if you want to know why interest rates are so low, interest rates are low because there hasn't been enough fiscal stimulus, and the Fed has been doing its best to stimulate the economy without pushing interest rates into the negative zone, which of course is happening in Europe and Japan as we speak. Today, in Germany, they are issuing 5-year government bonds with a negative rate. What that means is corporations are buying sovereign debt in Germany for a premium and earning no interest. So there are significant consequences from this. It is obviously, it's part of our politics. Lots of people don't understand it, and that's what I intend to accomplish in this course. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Hi, it's good to be here. Oh, thanks. I don't envy you what you've got ahead. You've got huge, hard choices to make. I want to take every single class I've heard about thus far. And now you've got a couple more to learn about. I enjoyed teaching at OLLI so much last time. I met wonderful people who were interested in developing their skills as story shapers and sharers. And some people started off, came into the class with fabulous projects. Other people discovered fabulous projects along the way. I enjoyed it no end, and I'm so happy to be back here again. Just briefly about me. There we go. If you've heard of me at all, it might be because of the novel Into the Forest that Karen mentioned. These are some of the covers. It's had a sort of happy and lucky life. Come January, when the French translation is published, it will have found its way into 15 languages. And it's also been translated into a movie. starring Ellen Page and Evan Rachel Wood. No male lead, but two strong women. And that premiered at the Toronto Film Festival last September and is actually going to be shown at the Rialto in Sebastopol this month. So if you're interested in seeing the movie, go to our wonderful Rialto and check out that version of the story. I've also written a few other books. 2 novels, Windfalls, which is about 2 women, 2 mothers in very different circumstances and how they end up helping and supporting each other. And my most recent novel is called Still Time, and it's about a Shakespeare scholar with Alzheimer's who, and the question kind of lurking over the story of his life and his relationships with human beings and with the plays, is there still time for him to reconcile with a daughter from whom he's been estranged? In this class, I think my big goal is to help people learn more about their relationship to storytelling and to discover the sorts of stories that they would like to tell and to develop the skills that they might need in order to tell those stories really powerfully and compellingly. We all have stories to tell, Isaac Dennison reminds us. And Barry Lopez reminds us that sometimes we need stories even more than food. I think story shaping and story sharing are one of the things that really make us human. And in this class, sort of one of the focuses is on fiction, so stories that have relied on at least some made-up facts in order to entertain or get at truths. But I think it's important to remember that all fiction comes, at least to some extent, from our experience, and all true stories are shaped. And so this is really a class for you if you're interested in writing and sharing stories. This is a class that I think will work really well for you if you've never written anything but grocery lists and thank you notes. And you'll be very welcome, and there's a great deal that you'll be able to share with us and that we'll be able to share with you. And I think it's also a class that supports people who are further along the path as writers. You'd all belong wherever you are in your relationship to writing. And look at these people. Don't you think they'd belong in an OLLI course? And I think that's a really nice reminder that unlike, ballet or basketball, writing is really a game for mature human beings. It's something, there are some really good reasons for that. There's something called syntactic maturity that develops as we get older. The life experience that we've had, our sense of patience and persistence, all of these things are skills that develop the longer we get to spend on the planet. And Isaac Dennison didn't start publishing until she was in her 50s. And here's another several groups of accomplished older writers. Richard Adams, who wrote Watership Down, which sold millions of copies worldwide, didn't start publishing until he was 52. Norman MacLean published A River Runs Through It when he was 74. That was his first. I think he'd written the theory of lyric poetry from the Renaissance to Coleridge before, and more power to him. We need that. But A River Runs Through It became a fine movie and really took off. And there's Harriet Dorr, who didn't publish her first book until she was 74. There's Laura Ingalls Wilder, Frank McCourt, Jennifer Worth, whose books Call the Midwife have become a wonderful television series. And I think you'll see here that some of these are autobiographical stories, some of these are more towards fiction, but there's a spectrum between the stories that come directly out of our own lives and the stories that come mainly from our imagination. And they all really use those same skills that we have to develop as storytellers. I think, though, that it's easy to get sidetracked with this whole notion of publication. And I think that that's really sort of one of the lesser motivations for writing. And certainly, my motivations for writing and the motivations to the people that I probably connect with best as a teacher have to do with all the other reasons that we have for writing. Our hopes of preserving the past and connecting with the present and shaping the future, our desires to delight other people, our friends and family, and to learn things ourselves and to stay engaged ourselves. So those are the real, I think, motivations for storytelling and story sharing, and certainly the ones that'll be driving the class. In the class, the format, as Karen mentioned, will be, I'll sort of come in with some aspect of writing or story making that I think is really important. I'll talk about it a little bit, usually with maybe some PowerPoint, and then I'll give you some sort of invitation for writing, and you'll have some chance in class to explore some of the things I've been talking about. And then there'll also be an opportunity, if you are interested, to share some of what you've written at your own discretion in smaller groups. It's a craft class, it's not a workshop the way we often think of workshops for writing groups, where we're going to be looking very closely over a long time at each other's manuscripts. We'll be talking both about the creative process, where you might find stories, how you might get started writing, how you might build and maintain momentum for writing, talking some about revision. And we'll also be talking some about the elements of a successful story and how to nurture them and find them, how to make characters that are both believable and engaging, and plots that are also compelling and make sense. And so those are some of the things we'll be doing in our 6 weeks, and I know I'll have a wonderful time, and I'll look forward to working with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, and I do apologize. I literally ran here. Parking is an issue, so even though I gave myself time, but I'm here and I'm really, really excited about this course. I have a background in art and archaeology. I'm an art history professor at SRJC, but I've spent 10 years of my life as an archaeologist. I'm Egyptian. I was born in Egypt, raised in Giza, right in the shadows of the pyramids. And I've spent my whole life kind of going back and forth, spending the summers in Egypt, excavating, working in the museum, and then my education here mostly. So I went to UC Berkeley, where I got my doctorate in Egyptian art and archaeology. And I really wanted to put together this class because there are so many new discoveries happening as we speak. Or nothing, we don't know, right? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. But in any case, I think it'll be fun to go back and look at one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time. So we're going to start the course reviewing what life was like in Imperial Egypt in the New Kingdom when King Tutankhamun lived. It was a very cosmopolitan world, believe it or not, and very multicultural. So we're going to talk about the era. We'll focus on King Tutankhamun himself and his lineage, to start off, we're not even sure who his parents were, right? King Akhenaten is probably his dad, but we're not sure who his mother is. So we'll spend some time kind of delving into his lineage. And here's a beautiful detail with him and his wife, Ankh-Senamun, who's another very interesting figure. And then, of course, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the discovery. November 4th, 1922 was an amazing day in the history of archaeology. And so I want us to kind of go and relive that as Howard Carter is opening the tomb and as he's discovering these wonderful things within. So a lot of the old black and white pictures have been colored, which is really exciting. So we'll walk you through the artifacts and look at a collection of the things that were uncovered. And we'll look at all the different rooms, what we know, what has been discovered so far, and then get to really look closely at some of these objects. I think a lot of us kind of know about the works, but to really understand the iconography and the symbolism in some of these beautiful things, and also very functional things as well. We'll look at the tomb itself, examine the tomb paintings, maybe a little crash course in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and also discover or look into the new discoveries, the new findings. His mummy has been reanalyzed. We've learned a little bit more about how he died, or some theories about that, and so we can kind of spend some time. And then, of course, you guys might have heard about the buzz that there might be 2 new rooms, right? So we're going to talk about the possibility of those. This is changing every day. I'm now questioning. When I gave like a talk about this earlier, I was like, there's something there, and now I'm holding back and saying, well, let's see. So together we'll kind of explore that as well. And then in the end of the class, we're going to kind of look at the impact of Egyptomania and the curse of those talks on our modern history and our modern experience of Egypt. So I hope you'll join me. It'll be a really great course. Thank you.